We are 39 days away from the 2024 presidential election, and polls show an incredibly tight race.
Yeah, actually 40 days, so we still have one more day for that.
Yes.
Rockford area political experts tell WIFR reporter Alyssa Kelly whoever wins could have one specific group to thank: current undecided voters.
Experts say decided voters develop a strong attachment to a specific party over time, but undecided voters don't have that same psychological attachment.
Undecided voters often just don't vote.
But that group, according to experts, could make or break the 2024 election for either former President Donald Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris.
Former President Trump is definitely a known quantity. VP Kamala Harris, there's some unknowns with her. And so, I think voters are still trying to find out what her policies will be.
April Clark, a political science professor at Northern Illinois University, explains undecided voters get lost in the process and often revert to a candidate's previous actions to determine which person to choose.
And they're looking back to when Trump was president and trying to determine, do they want to go back to the Trump administration for good or bad, or do they want to, with Kamala Harris, use perspective, basis and try and figure out what her administration would look like for them.
Rockford University political expert Bob Evans says the number of undecided voters actually decreased in the past several elections, but in battleground states, that group matters.
The number of undecided voters is likely to make a real difference in the outcome.
Evan feels like those voters who haven't picked a candidate actually like waiting until late in the election season to decide because it preserves their options.
If you see the undecided number drop suddenly, that's rare, because that means that something is making the undecided voters decide before they have to.
Clark suggests undecided voters go to each political party's website and not social media to better understand each candidate.
Thank you, Alyssa. And Clark also explains trusted family and friends are a great resource to turn to when deciding on who to vote for in the 2024 presidential election.